Let's probably move to the future
Yeah.
now. What do you think, in your opinion, you have this, you sit in this vantage point of looking at and working closely with policymakers,
Yes.
with innovative companies, right? Probably also on the social side of things. What do you see as the few big trends emerging in healthcare, which will shape healthcare over the next decade or so?
Well, I think there's so many different things. So let me just quickly go through a few of them. The first is that we will see new research and discovery influencing the way that we deliver healthcare. Whether this is new ways of diagnosing or new ways of treating illness. And certainly that has to include what we call precision medicine, which is targeting a therapy towards an individual's genetic makeup.
Sure.
So I think you need to look at the new discovery, new research, the pharmaceutical industry, the scientific community will drive a lot of that. The second thing I think you have to look at is how we pay for healthcare. And there, I think that there is literally a race going on, whether what we call value-based purchasing, being able to make smarter, better purchasing decisions, knowing the price and the outcome of something, whether that ends up moderating the cost of healthcare to get us better value, whether that can happen versus what I call price setting. Ultimately, when healthcare or any good becomes, the price becomes more than what people can pay, that's when government steps in. We see this with oil prices right now, where essentially governments are saying, whoa, yeah, there's a certain amount you can charge. Well, this same thing is beginning to happen with healthcare. And in the United States, what they're calling the Inflation Reduction Act has a large component in that directed towards drug pricing, where essentially this is price setting. So there's this race between value-based care versus government intervention and price setting that we're going to watch over the next couple of years to see which one takes on more influence. The third factor is the role of the consumer themselves, the role of the patient.
Sure.
And if you look at how almost every other part of our economy, the consumer is driving a lot of the decisions because they have more information. Once information becomes available and the tools become available through digital tools and patient engagement tools, we're going to see a different way that consumers behave. And we're already beginning to see that with the ability to access their information through computer systems, but also telehealth, remote monitoring in the patient's homes. And this is driving the last big trend that I see, which is a shift away from hospital-based care into the home, where people are now getting the tools in their homes or where they work or wherever they happen to be able to get their health care in a setting that they want to get their health care in. And all of these things are driving essentially a big change in the healthcare system.
Very interesting. So, you know what, there are so many branching questions from what you just mentioned, but thank you. This was super helpful. Let me just double click on some of the things you spoke about. Let me start with the second point. You spoke about the Inflation Reduction Act. For all our colleagues watching that, would you mind just explaining broadly the Inflation Reduction Act and in more specifically the implication around the whole pharmaceutical part of it?
Right. Absolutely. The Inflation Reduction Act was one of the biggest pieces of legislation that the Biden administration, the current president, has been able to pass since he became president approximately 2 years ago. And in this, a big component of it is it talks about how pharmaceutical pricing needs to be moderated, needs to come down. And the way that they have done this in this new law is they've given for the first time the ability of the government, Medicare, the government healthcare program, to actually negotiate with pharmaceutical companies. Now, prior to that, it was illegal for the government to negotiate, so it couldn't use its big buying power to try to drive costs down. But they have now allowed, starting in 2026, so approximately almost a little bit more than 3 years from now, for the government to start purchasing 10 specific drugs that are known to be high-cost drugs. That number will then increase in 2029 to 20 drugs and then increase from there. The second major part of the Drug Purchasing Act is the government has put a cap on how much drug companies can increase their prices. And that will essentially impact another 1,200 drugs in the United States that will prevent the pharmaceutical company from increasing the drug prices above that cap. If they do, the pharmaceutical company needs to write a check back to the government in the form of a rebate. So this is the first time that we've seen the government step in and start talking about specific ways that they can negotiate, but also, in essence, this beginning of this price setting that I talked about earlier. And it turns out that that was able to get both Republican and Democratic support, because overwhelmingly the American public believes that drug prices are too high.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what do you think is going to be the implication of this on the life science industry, and over what time frames?
I think that because this is still being implemented, not till 2026, and then again more in 2029, this is not going to have a huge negative impact on the industry in the very beginning, which is now. This is not going to impact their profits in a significant way. What this is really indicating to the pharmaceutical industry is that if they don't begin to start coming up with their own solutions to affordability, they can expect more of this to happen. And their efforts to block all of these efforts using their lobbyists were not completely successful. It did moderate the impact, but it shows that they can't ignore the problem. This is everybody's problem. So I actually think that it will have a positive impact in that the pharmaceutical companies that are delivering real value to people are going to have to find different ways of demonstrating that value. And I think that's a good thing for everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I also did just want to mention, when you talked about doubling down on things, the area that I didn't really talk about specifically was what's going to happen when all this new data becomes available, when we make our systems interoperable. And I think this is an area that Indegene can have a big impact on. The ability to use that data in a way to advance healthcare using what we call predictive analytics. How can you use the data to decide which patients are going to benefit most from which therapies? And how early do you want to begin to intervene to have the biggest impact? Often in healthcare, we wait till the very end, and then having an impact is much, much harder. The use of artificial intelligence, which right now is primarily limited to pattern recognition, taking big data sets and identifying patterns so you can do drug discovery or you can do better diagnosis, like in pathology and radiology. But this is going to become much broader in use and have additional implications as artificial intelligence begins to start helping us in other forms of decision making. And so I think that the ability to take data from different sources using pharmaceutical data, physical medicine data, behavioral data, social determinant data, integrating that data, using that to apply these tools of predictive analytics and artificial intelligence could fundamentally change the way that we deliver healthcare, improve the standards that we deliver healthcare in other words, decrease the variability of healthcare decision making, and ultimately make the ability to discover new therapies much, much quicker.
Absolutely. I think that's something which all of us at Indegene are extremely excited about. Use of real world data evidence for so many things, understanding disease progression, patient journeys, where to make interventions, right? Expediting clinical trials, helping physicians make the right decisions. So there are so many things you can do more accurately, right, than what
exactly. And I think the ability, we're going to see much more of that from Indegene and others. That is where I think we're going to see some of the biggest advances in the next 10 years.
Sure. Well, that's very interesting.